Hi, professors. My name is Ashley Davis, and I'm a junior at UNCW studying business administration and a concentration in marketing strategy. And I wanted to come on here and ask, how do you guys show love and grace within the classroom when having open discussions with students in regards to hard conversations and even areas such as science, where God created science and stuff like that, that comes across as loving and not judgmental?
Hey friends, and welcome back to Meet the Prof. I'm Shane Hartley, and my friend Spence Hackney and I collect great questions from college students like you just heard, and then we ask them to Christian professors, and we are hoping that God will encourage Christ-centered conversations on the college campus through this. It is a privilege to have you with us. Thank you for joining us. And the interview today is from Dr. Phil Bishop. So Phil is a retired professor of exercise physiology from the University of Alabama. And I used to work with the ministry crew at the University of Alabama for about 3 years. So he has a dear place in my heart from there, but also I've known him for several years. And I think you're really going to enjoy getting to know him. The most surprising thing that came out of this interview for me is his description of retraction theory. And that is the idea where researchers, they have to have some faith in their colleagues when they're doing certain research, and that sometimes what they base their research on is retracted later. So just very intriguing to think about how faith is involved even in the research process. Before we get started, if you would please follow or subscribe to the podcast if you like it, that would really help. And without any further ado, here's our interview with Dr. Phil Bishop. Well, Phil, thank you for joining the podcast. It is great to be with you. How you doing today?
Doing great, buddy.
Good. Spence and I are excited to get to know you. And I think one of the things I've always appreciated about you when I've seen you at conferences is the energy you bring in, that you seem to get energy from people, and then your energy is contagious to people as well. Have you heard that before?
I guess Energizer Bunny is probably as close as anyone's got.
I like it.
That, and it looks like you've got a lot of good stories. From what I've read, there's a lot you can tell us. So anxious to hear it.
Well, when you've lived as many years as I have, the stories accumulate.
So what are you now, like 28 or 30, something like that?
No, 73 is more accurate.
Wow. Well, let's jump in. Tell us some about your early years. Tell us about your story.
Well, I was really blessed to grow up in a very small town in North Georgia where everyone knew everyone. Had one high school, had 2 or 3 grammar schools, but it was sort of an idyllic, sort of a Mayberry kind of place in real life. And there weren't many ways you could get in trouble. And we, spent our time hunting and fishing and roaming the woods and those kind of things. And grew up in a Southern Baptist church and went to every service at every opportunity and really learned a lot. And I look back on some of the men who mentored me as a youngster, and at the time I didn't necessarily appreciate it, but looking back, I really appreciate Norman Sosby and so many others who built into my life as a youngster. And so very poor family, but we didn't realize it because we didn't think about those things. And, I look back and Kierkegaard, Soren Kierkegaard, famous philosopher, said, we must live life forward, but we only understand life backward. And so looking back, I just see the hand of God, in everything. I mean, getting in the Naval Academy, my high school time, my post, as soon as we graduated that summer, my time in the Navy, it was just God's hand in all of that. And then going to grad school, and then my university appointment. I just see God's hand all over that.
What do you see the students struggling with today, from your perspective and your experience? What's your view of what they are struggling the most with today and why?
The epidemic of loneliness. And I think inadvertently, we have created a culture in the USA and in other places too. In all the, I just came back from Japan 2 months ago, but our culture is a text, a Facebook, a Instagram, a TikTok culture.
Yeah.
And so that is no replacement for face-to-face interaction.
Yeah.
Probably most people viewing this experienced COVID. And those early months of COVID when everybody was isolated. I'm an extrovert, as you might can tell. And it really dawned on me, boy, this Zoom is fine. I love Zoom, but it's no replacement for face-to-face. And so many of our students, I spoke in Japan not long ago and did a little research. The number one cause of death in college students in Japan is suicide. In USA, the number two cause of death is suicide. And so I put together a talk several months back on helping your friend be mentally stronger. They're suffering from loneliness. They're suffering from despair. They're suffering from a lack of hope. They're suffering from a lack of purpose, suffering from a lack of love, feeling loved. And boy, that is a tough, tough place to be. And as long as everything's going great, as long as, you can deal with a lack of hope, a lack of purpose, a lack of meaning, as long as everything's going well. But when things turn down, being in that place of despair is tough. And for Christians, we have hope. We have purpose. We have meaning. Now, we may not think about those things, but really should. And for those of us who are followers of Christ, we need to help our friends realize there is hope in life. There's purpose and meaning in life. But it only comes through God, a relationship, not a religion. One thing I used to tell my students, undergrads and graduate students, learn to ask good questions. And that is a skill that you can gain if you practice it. It will pay off in college. Ask your professors questions. Learn to ask your friends. Shane, I know you got a big smile on your face all the time. Why is that? I'm thinking about life, about hope. And man, life looks kind of hopeless if you really get practical about it. It looks kind of bleak to me. Where do you find life? Where do you find hope? Where do you find purpose? Learning to ask good questions is a valuable skill, and it will serve you well the rest of your life, but you got to practice just like everything else. Most of the students walking across campus have their phone in their hand.
Sure.
And I guess my advice would be what I discovered during COVID, and maybe you discovered too, is those remote friendships don't replace the face-to-face contact.
Sure.
And I loved my career. I loved being a professor. I'm retired now, but I look back and loved it, absolutely. My biggest regret was not taking more people to lunch. I ate my lunch at my desk because it was very, very efficient.
Sure.
But people matter. And so I really regret not taking my students to lunch, not taking my colleagues to lunch. Now, I don't want to talk too long here, but when we went to conferences and drove to conferences, now that was quality time.
What is it like being a Christian and a scientist? How are those compatible? I think for some people they would say those aren't compatible at all.
Well, I'm not only a scientist, I'm a retired scientist, but I still see myself as a scientist because that's the way I see the world. I'm also a skeptic, which often goes very closely with science. I'm testing everything all the time. And so as a human physiologist, I got to study the human body. And it is fascinating. One of the first professional talks I put together as a Christian professor, both those things together, was called Evidence of God in Human Physiology. I used to tell my students, we talk about oxygen transport or control systems for the heart. And if you believe this happened by luck, you've got a lot more faith than I do. Because as a scientist, as a skeptic, these kind of things, statistically, I taught statistics. And as the statistician, as a scientist, things like this don't happen by luck. And if they don't happen by luck, they sure look designed. And so there's evidence of designer all around us, whatever your field. If you're a physicist, microphysics, small physics, particle physics, or astrophysics, it's hard for me to imagine. You really skeptically look at that and say, this happened by luck? How did it get started? First causes. I put together, of course, a couple of talks on faith in science. As a scientist, I would read other people's research. That's how we start all of our experiments, reading other people's research. And I had to have faith that they were being honest and forthright and accurate in their data. Well, why would they not be? Well, there's something called Retraction Watch. If you will Google Retraction Watch, you will find out we scientists aren't as trustworthy as we want you public folks to believe we are. I had to have faith in their data. I had to have faith in my statisticians. And sometimes the statistics were more complicated than I could do. And so I had to have faith. And so there's faith at all these points. And then when we would finish our study and write it up, we would submit it for peer review. People reading our stuff have to have faith that our peer reviewers were conscientious and careful in their peer review. So there's faith at all levels. And then if you look back at the history of science, many scientists were committed, highly committed Christians. And I'll just give one example and stop, but I can give you lots more. If you took physics in college, you had Newtonian physics, kinetics and kinematics. Newton, who died as a young person, really wrote more theology than he did science.
Really?
And there's lists, Heisenberg, and there's lots of people who are well-recognized Christians and well-recognized scientists. So they're not incompatible. I will argue that it's science can reinforce your Christianity. I feel like I'm a much stronger Christian for having done these many, many investigations.
Phil, talk to us more about this healthy skepticism. Some college students, young people, when they've struggled with doubt in their faith, doubt that there's a God, or how can you believe the Bible, or that Jesus existed, sometimes they're really put down. Like, how can you doubt? Just have faith. And what you've described is that there is a healthy doubting that even goes with being a scientist. So can you talk to us more about that, and even what advice would you give a student who is struggling with doubt about a belief in God or in Jesus?
I would say ask good questions. You've heard me say that before. Second is do good reading. There are some wonderful authors, including some scientists, who've written some wonderful, very logical, very rational, even scientific arguments for God and answers to critics. And in my investigation as a scientist, in my investigation as a Christian, I get answers resolved. Let me give you a quick example. I've got a friend, very sharp friend, did a PhD at Caltech. And he grew up in a Christian home, abandoned the faith. And he sends me an email. What evidence would be sufficient to convince you that God does not exist? Now, one of my favorite philosophers is an atheist. He's now dead, so he's now a believer. But at the time he was alive, he was an atheist. And Bertrand Russell has the idea of Russell's teapot. If I argued, this is Bertrand Russell arguing, that there's a teapot, a silver teapot, orbiting some distant heavenly body, how would you prove it or disprove it? He says, well, believing in God. So I put together, I kind of surprised myself, 5 arguments for why God must exist. And let me give you one of those. If the world were very, very simple, number one, if it were very simple, we scientists would have gone out of business 100 years ago. The fact is, there's more research questions now than ever in the history of science. When I retired, I had this long list of research I never got to. Really wished I had. And so the world is enormously complex. And even though we've been running science for 2,000 years, there's more to do now than when we began. Now, the fact that we can understand it at all, I think, is a maho day. God has implanted in us curiosity and enough intelligence that we can figure out these things slowly. And there were 4 more. But I sent all 5 of my arguments to this young man. And as far as I know, my friend's still not a Christian. But, to your skepticism, there may be an irrationality to your skepticism. And, a lot of professors, in my opinion, friends of mine, are too smart for God. And the rationale, I think, goes something. Now, they don't think through this way, but to summarize, little children die of cancer. If I were God, this wouldn't happen. And because of this thinking, God must not exist. Well, that's pretty faulty thinking, but we can go into that more later if you want to.
I love hearing about your dialogue with the student this way. And so I'm wondering if you could tell us more about any other opportunities you had as a professor to actually talk about Jesus. Could you tell students that you were a Christian, and what opportunities did you have?
I would introduce myself. I was fortunate because I taught statistics. I had fairly small classes, I think about 40 at this university. I spent most of my career, 40 or less students. And so everyone on the first day would introduce themselves. I would go last. I would say I have 5 children, and depends on how many had graduated at the time. 5 of them graduated from this esteemed university. The most important thing you need to know about me is I'm a Christian. Now, I should have said follower of Christ, but I said Christian. And I'm happy to talk to anyone about that. Love to discuss it. To me, it's the most important decision a person can make. And I used to ask my students, I had John, my most memorable. I said, John, have you ever had a Christian professor? And the answer I got most frequently was, well, maybe Dr. So-and-so, but you're the first person who's ever identified as a Christian. And then John added something. He says, but I have had an anti-Christian professor.
Yeah.
I said, okay, what department? And he said, anthropology. And I said, John, I don't want you to answer, but I bet it was my friend Chris. And he didn't answer, which was good. But, this guy, John, identified people attacking Christianity. And so be prepared. If you're a Christian, just because someone attacks doesn't mean they've won the battle. It just means they've attacked. And so, I want to help students be ready to answer, to give a reason for the hope that is within them, as Scripture tells us. I gave this talk I told you about earlier about evidence of God in human physiology. And I really love talking to students about God. Like I say, it's the most important decision a person can make. What will you do with God? And so I love to talk about it. I would love to talk about anybody watching this. We'll give my email at the end, but, dissecting the heart seeing I had a dried set of dried lungs that I made myself, just the
Well,
wonder of God's creation. And that's the way I described it. I would bring in an actual heart when we're talking about the heart and say, look at this heart.
Wow.
I'd I'd slice it open, put my finger behind a heart valve. And Spence, you can see my finger through your heart valve. That's what's keeping you alive right
Wow.
now, brother.
Wow.
And God's made this wonderful heart. And so, God, we're talking about the human body in my class. Man, God made a wonderful body and hemoglobin and blood clotting. And God made a blood clot system. I'll stop, I promise. 13 factors. Some people argue 14. We won't quibble. 13 factors required to clot your blood. If your blood clots right now when it shouldn't clot, you will be dead in about 6 or 7 minutes, maybe 8 or 9 if you're really strong. If your blood fails to clot, it will take longer, but you will also be dead in the next hour or so. And so this mechanism, you got to get 13 factors all together. You happen to think this happened by luck? Your blood can't clot when it's not supposed to, but it better clot when it's supposed to, or you are dead. All of us are dead. Man, how did this happen? By luck? I wish I had that kind of faith.
it speaks to design, doesn't it? We were designed.
Yeah. Hey, you mentioned earlier that a lot of professors or a lot of students could think of professors who they thought might be Christians but never identified as it, whereas you would kind of lead with their identification as a Christian. Why is it that you think professors are hesitant to identify themselves as Christians?
The number of Christians is a minority. We are a very small minority on the secular campus. And as a minority, we can be looked down upon because we believe this religious mythology. And I can rationalize this. Hey, I sing in the choir on Sunday. I don't, but I mean, I could say it. I sing in the choir. I'm an elder. I'm a deacon. I teach Sunday school. I do blah, blah, blah on Sunday. Monday through Saturday, you won't hear a word from me because of the fear factor. Now, what we're doing, of course, is communicating by our silence. I ask all these students, did you have a Christian professor? Well, maybe, but you're the only one who's ever identified. And it's just a fear factor. I mean, people will tell you, well, we're a secular school and it's not right. Well, my anti-Christian professors are bold about attacking Christianity. And I can introduce you to some, my good friends who are hostile to Christianity. Well, if they can be hostile, I'm not taking a lot of class time. And I've come up actually with 29 things I think a professor can do in under 5 minutes to communicate their faith. Some of them are 0 minutes. But we can communicate our faith. And like I say, every student is eternal, an eternal being. And they really need to know that you can be intellectual and follow Christ. And
it seems like as a professor, and I'm worried about it sort of setting my career back because I lose status as a Christian, right? And it might, like it very well could, but that is not the worst thing that could happen. I think the worst that can happen was I forego relationships with people that may bring them into a kingdom that I'm going to live in forever. And so really, that's not even a question worth having in some regard, is whether or not it's going to hurt my career.
I want to quote a scripture here, Spence, because you're provoking me, buddy. It's your fault. But I read this scripture over and over and over, and about 2 years ago, it really hit me. The last beatitude. Now, the Beatitudes are the preamble to the Sermon on the Mount, famous sermon Jesus gave. This is Matthew chapter 5. The next to last beatitude, and it's verse 10, says, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." And then it gets better. Now, this is Jesus. This is not me. This is Jesus. It says, Blessed are you when men revile you and
Yeah.
persecute you for my name. This is Jesus speaking. My name's sake, rejoice, rejoice, and be glad.
Yeah.
For your reward in heaven is great. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now let's pause just a minute. Pretend you're a professor. Scary thought. Pretend you're a professor. Would you rather be Professor of the Year at your university or have reward in heaven,
Oh,
which is
yeah.
eternal and great?
Yeah.
Now, before you pick, you can only pick one. Before you pick,
Yeah.
tell me who was Professor of the Year 3 years ago. I bet you can't remember.
Yeah.
But reward in heaven. Now, my conclusion for myself and other people is we don't believe Jesus. Reward in heaven
Yeah.
is great. All I've got to do is be persecuted. Man,
Yeah.
on campus, if you're working in construction engineering, it's pretty hard to be persecuted. If you're
Yeah.
on campus and you're a follower of Jesus, it's easy to be persecuted.
Yeah.
And your reward in heaven is great. Wow.
Yeah.
I don't even know what that means, but boy, it sure sounds good.
That's probably a great thing to leave our listeners with. You want to do a little lightning round, Shane, to wrap things up with
Yeah,
a
that
professor
sounds
here?
great. Yeah, Phil,
Awesome.
thank you so much. This is helpful. And we want to ask some questions that are for fun and helps us get to know you. And then we have a little competition going on for Spence and I may have some different answers with this. So, the first question I want to ask you is Marvel movies or DC movies?
I'm ADHD. I can hardly watch a movie, to be honest with you. And so I can't pick either one because I've seen almost none of them.
Got it.
I
All
love
right. How
it.
about this? How about mountains or beach?
Ooh, now that is tough because we love them both. I'm Cuban ancestry. So to be honest, I really love going to the beach and getting my tan nice and dark. And,
Okay.
I'll read on the beach and my wife and I walk up and down the beach and the beach is constantly changing. And so I grew up in the mountains. You could see beautiful mountains from my front yard garden where I grew up. But I'd have to say by a slight margin, just the beach is just hard to beat. That's one of the few places I can truly relax. Every place else, I'm kind of ADHD, and at the beach, I can lose
hear
it
you.
a little.
I hear you.
I'm with you on the beach. I think that's the right answer. You got that one right. All right. How about this, Phil? Would you rather live the rest of your life with broccoli stuck in your teeth or with an eyelash in your eye?
I probably have broccoli in my teeth right now, so I'd go with that. My vision's pretty important to me, but the broccoli we can live with.
Yeah. All right. Last
Good.
question. One food the rest of your life: McDonald's cheeseburgers or Chick-fil-A chicken sandwiches. This is it for the rest of your
Ooh, now
life.
the chicken garden wrap has got vegetables in it, so I'm going with the chicken garden wrap.
Oh, you see, he already cheated. Chicken garden wrap wasn't it. It's just the standard Chick-fil-A sandwich. It's the fried chicken sandwich. So it's not healthy.
Okay.
Neither of them are healthy.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
I
So
get
I
it.
guess
That's
the chicken
good.
sandwich will have to be it.
We'll go with that.
Thank you so much, Phil. Yeah, it's so good to get to talk to you. Thanks for letting us get to know some of your life. And for listeners who want to get to know you more, if they want to reach out to you some way, what's the best way that they can reach out to you?
Yes, if you will email me, I respond to email typically fairly quickly, but it's pretty simple. It's P Bishop, just like in the church, P for Philip, Bishop, like in the church, at ua.edu. So that's P Bishop at ua.edu. And I will get back to you and we'll set up a telephone or Zoom or email conversation, whatever you want to do.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that interview, and you can learn more as well as read about other Christian professors on our website, meettheprof.com, and you can search for professors by name or by state or even by college campus. And you can also find many helpful resources about questions that were in the interview and other ways of answering tough questions at cru.org, and that's cru.org. And college students, if you would like to ask a question to a professor and potentially be on the show, this is how you do it. Follow us on Instagram. It's Meet the Prof Official. And then upload us a video by direct message where you say your name, your college campus, and what year you are, and then ask your question. And you can ask more than one question. And hopefully then you can be featured on the show. And if you enjoyed this, would you please share this episode with a friend? Someone you think it would be helpful to. And please don't forget to follow or subscribe to the podcast. And if you're listening to this, but you would like to watch the videos of these interviews, we record them all and we put them on YouTube. So you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is Meet the Prof Official. And we would love to meet you there. And lastly, if you would like to financially support our Faculty Commons ministry with Cru, you can do so online by going to give.cru.org/0424344. So thank you for being with us. And until next time, we hope you feel encouraged to have a Christ-centered conversation on your college campus.